Nzambiko Zambi wavova kwano wayenda longa bantu bami Bantu buba fogele baseyi Nzambiko Bajaba nwaba kwela kwelisa Uketi kwena mulonga bantu bo Katukira katuseyi Nzambiko Muntanguyo Ukakena mulonga bantu Katukila katuzeyi Nzambiko Kyali kya kingi Monasi ya bunga zanza Kuvino la majela tango kaimani Patubami No wawalonga Henda walonga No wawalonga Henda walonga Tango ifueri Kuvino la majela Una fula sandolo buza isa toma 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 tu mo bois Batu ba isa konkoti la mva mwelo no wa Tu se bode la no wa You know what to say budile You know what to say budila You know what to say budile You know what to say budila no wa no You know what to say budile You know what to say no wa no wa no wa no to say budile You know say budila za You know what to say budile You know what to say budila You know what to say budile You know what to say budila You know what to say budile You know to say budila za no wa 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 Zazanoa, 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 Zazanoa.
In 1948, Britain was just starting to recover from the Second World War. Towns and cities had been bombed. Thousands of homes and buildings were destroyed, and they all needed to be rebuilt. In the Caribbean, thousands of men and women had served in the British Armed Forces. After the war, some of them answered an advert to come to Britain, where there were lots of different jobs available. Other people just wanted to see England, which they'd heard so much about. They all got on a ship, the Empire Windrush, which left the Caribbean to travel thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean. This was the first time so many Caribbean people had come to live in Britain. Many more arrived in the following years. It was on the 22nd of June 1948 that the Empire Windrush arrived at Tilbury Docks in Essex. But when its passengers got off, they found that Britain was not as friendly to them as they had hoped. It was cold and grey. And the Caribbean people soon experienced racism and discrimination. They found it hard to get proper homes to live in and to make friends with British people. Later, many of their children were bullied at school because of the colour of their skin. There were racial attacks, and years later, race riots broke out in cities across Britain. Settling into a new country was difficult, and black people had to stick together and support one another.
Empire Windrush's story starts before the Second World War, when Blom and Voss shipbuilders of Hamburg built a ship between 1924 and 1931 and named her MV Monte Rosa. At the start of the war, Monte Rosa was allocated for military use by the Germans, used mainly as a troop ship. In May 1945, she was captured by British forces and taken as a prize of war. She was later converted at Tilbury Docks by the ship repairing company Green and Silly Weir for use as an immigration ship and renamed MV Empire Windrush. Her very first voyage in 1948 was a memorable one, docking in Kingston, Jamaica, to pick up servicemen who were on leave. An advert had been placed in a Jamaican newspaper offering cheap transport on the ship for those who wanted to come and work in the UK. Many former servicemen took this opportunity to return to Britain, while others decided to make the journey just to see what England was like. The landing of the Empire Windrush and its passengers at Tilbury on the 22nd of June 1948 was to mark a significant moment in our country's history, in the building of what we know today as multicultural Britain. In recent years, passengers on this ship and others who arrived later from the colonies and Commonwealth had been regarded as the Windrush generation. From the late 1940s to the early 1960s, thousands of men, women and children left the Caribbean for Britain, encouraged by the 1948 British Nationality Act, granting citizenship and right of abode in the UK to all members of the British Empire. The 802 Caribbean citizens on board Empire Windrush were the first of around 500,000 Commonwealth citizens who settled in Britain between 1948 and 1971, invited to live as British citizens and help rebuild the mother country after the Second World War.
So the Windrush turned up for the here on this landing stage in Tilbury, 22nd of June, and that will now be 72 years ago. But in fact, it actually arrived the night before and parked down the river and came up here in daylight. Most of them have come over here on the sort of promise of work with London Transport. They were only paying 20 odd pounds for their ticket, so it was subsidised heavily from Jamaica. But don't forget, there were another 400 or so on the ship who paid full ticket price and were just normal travellers. They came, they got their baggage, they got their customs check, and they bought a ticket, got on a train and went wherever. London Transport, you would have thought, would have had lots of buses and things to take these people and ship them to temporary accommodation. But they hadn't. And there was a bit of pandemonium on the dockside because there were 200 people in the baggage hall and the whole of the building with their luggage, not very much luggage, some of them I imagine, and they were waiting to hear how they were going to get to London Transport. In the end, they were bused to Clapham South Underground Station, the Deep Shelter, which is way down, it's below the Northern Line. These poor people who'd come from the Caribbean and put them down a hole in the ground and say there are bunk beds down there and there's a canteen down there and there's a doctor and nurses down there, and tomorrow the man from the Labour Exchange is coming with all the details of all the London Transport jobs. You don't need to come out at all until we place you. And some of them were there for as long as 2 or 3 weeks. And these poor people, I can't help feeling that they just didn't know what they were letting themselves in for. And I have a feeling that somewhere along the line, wires got a little crossed. And some of them done very well. Some of them suffered quite a lot. And for which, we can only be sorry, really. It's a great shame.
On the 22nd of June 1948, the MV Empire Windrush arrived at Tilbury Docks in London, carrying 492 West Indian immigrants. The ship, which was originally known as MV Monte Rosa, was a German cruise ship that had been used as a troop transporter during the Second World War. She was seized by Britain at the end of the conflict, when she was renamed. In 1948, the British government passed the Nationality Act, which gave British citizenship to people who lived in the Commonwealth countries and allowed them the right to settle in Britain. Britain desperately needed workers in the aftermath of the Second World War, so Commonwealth citizens were encouraged to immigrate and to help to rebuild the mother country. A series of adverts in and around Jamaica advertised tickets for the journey on board Empire Windrush for £28, which equates to around £600 sterling today. Many of the passengers who bought this first wave of tickets had been members of the Royal Air Force during the war. A number of them sought to rejoin the armed forces, while others undertook the voyage to see what opportunities Britain would present. Although the press generally greeted them warmly as sons of empire, some members of Parliament opposed the arrival of the immigrants. Their presence was needed to staff a number of industries, however, but although Britain was short of workers, there was also a shortage of housing. This led to the new arrivals being temporarily housed in the deep-level air raid shelter in South Clapham, approximately 2 miles away from Brixton town centre, while they searched for accommodation. The majority permanently settled in Britain, but the Afro-Caribbean community experienced significant prejudice, intolerance, and racism in subsequent years.
No man don't cry.
75 years ago, on the 22nd of June 1948, 492 people stepped off the Empire Windrush ocean liner at Tilbury Docks in Essex to start a new life in Britain. The vast majority of the people who took those first steps came from the Caribbean. The ship itself represents a piece of British social history, of the many individual journeys taken as part of a larger wave of immigration. The legacy of this journey across the Atlantic, and of the Black British community's struggle for acceptance and opportunity, is now commemorated and celebrated on Windrush Day. After the Second World War, the British Labour government encouraged immigration from the Caribbean to fill jobs and stimulate growth. The offer of stable work and improved incomes encouraged thousands to make the journey. Many took up jobs in construction, cleaning, and in the new National Health Service. Black migrants who settled in the UK during this time found acceptance and tolerance hard to come by. Racism was common, with hostility amongst local Britons often blatant. On occasion, tensions rose to a point of discord, with rioting sometimes taking place in areas with large black populations, such as in London's Notting Hill in 1950. In 2018, the Conservative government introduced strict immigration policies that encouraged the deportation of those who did not hold documentation which proved their right to stay in the UK. It is thought that 83 of those deported had come to Britain in the Windrush wave of migration and were legal migrants. They were born as British subjects in British colonies and had made their way to the UK as part of a British government programme. Outrage ensued, and the government was forced to backtrack.
They've come to seek work in Britain and are ready and willing to do any kind of job that will help the motherland along the road to prosperity.
The relationship between this country and the West Indies and Caribbean is inextricable. When my parents and their generation arrived in this country under the Nationality Act of 1948, they arrived here as British citizens. thousands of British men and women denied their rights in this country under her watch in the Home Office, can she tell the House how many have been denied health under the National Health Service? How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their job? This is a day of national shame, and it has come about because of a hostile environment policy that was begun under her Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I share the Honourable Gentleman's admiration for the people who came here from the Caribbean and contributed so much to our society.
I want to apologise to you today because we are genuinely sorry for any anxiety that has been caused.
So what? They went to British schools, they worked British jobs, they built British lives. But recently some were denied healthcare, lost jobs, were detained and faced being thrown out of their country. They are the Windrush generations. So what is the Windrush generation? Between 1948 through to the late 60s, more than 500,000 people came to the UK from the Caribbean. It was the first wave of Commonwealth immigration. They were invited over by the British government to work in public services and help rebuild the country after the Second World War.
Where do you come from?
Jamaica.
Have you brought your children with you?
Yes.
How many?
5 children.
Those children who came here are now pensioners. People like Michael Braithwaite, who left Barbados when he was 9. He was told he was illegal after reapplying for his job in a school, a job which he then lost because he couldn't show the right paperwork.
Do I belong where I am for what I've been here all this time? And to be put in that position, it sort of made me feel like I'm an alien, basically, or I have no status.
Another who has suffered is Hubert Leslie. He came from Jamaica on his mum's passport and found himself out of work as a maintenance man because the Home Office had declared him an illegal immigrant.
I feel like an alien in this country. Yeah, because if I've worked and lived in this country for a long time and the Home Office would come and look at me and tell me that I've got no status in this country and I've worked and I've paid my tax.
So what led to the threats of deportation? It's really important to know that the Windrush generation have been living here legally. Tougher immigration rules were brought in by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary, where, in her own words, a hostile environment was created to expel illegal immigrants. Remember those vans? The problem is that a lot of the Windrush generations never applied for a British passport when they arrived here, because back then the kids would have travelled on their parents' passports when they came to this country. When their parents or grandparents passed away, they were then left with no ID of their own. Anthony Bryan came to the UK from Jamaica with his family in 1965. At only 7 years old, he arrived on his brother's passport. When he recently tried to apply for his own British passport to visit his mum in Jamaica, he had no proof of ID, so immigration came knocking.
They said I'm illegal. Their job is to remove me out of the country. They had a plane ticket for me. And I phoned my missus and I said to her, they tell me that they got a plane ticket for me and they're going to remove me out of the country.
Anthony is actually one of the lucky ones. He recently found out that he's allowed to stay in his country. When immigration rules changed in 1971, anyone from the Windrush generation living in the UK was automatically given indefinite leave to remain. But the Home Office didn't keep a record of those people, and it's estimated more than 50,000 may not have registered their right to live here. So what did they have to do to stay? To prove they're living legally in the country, they were asked to provide at least one document, sometimes more, like a payslip, medical record, bank statement for every year that they've been in the country. That could mean finding a doctor's note from 50 years ago. I mean, would you be able to find one from 3 years ago, let alone half a century? For most, the UK is the only home they know. Until now, they have never questioned whether they belonged here.
These individuals, having been here from childhood, had no sense in their minds that they're not British. And that is really the tragedy of it.
So what has across Parliament to change this policy? More than 130,000 people signed a petition asking the government to grant the Windrush generation amnesty. Labour's David Lammy made an impassioned speech to the Home Secretary Amber Rudd in the Commons.
This is a day of national shame, and it has come about because of a hostile environment policy that was begun under her Prime Minister.
The UK Immigration Minister, Caroline Noakes, admits that terrible mistakes have been made.
These are people who we welcomed here way back in the 50s and 60s, and it's really important to me that we correct any error and that we send a message of reassurance to people who are here. We want to get this right for them.
Theresa May has apologised to Commonwealth leaders for the anxiety caused over the controversy. That's probably a good sign for people here. The only problem is that some people might have already been deported. So what happens next? A Windrush task force has now been set up by the Home Secretary Amber Rudd to address the situation. But the Home Office has stressed the importance of a robust immigration policy to root out those who actually are here illegally. Given the attention this story has got, it's likely the government will find a solution to this issue. But for the Windrush generation, will it really make up for the way that many of their lives were turned upside down?
Alfred Gardner was just a teenager when he came to Britain for the first time in 1944 to do his bit for the war effort as an RAF ground engineer. When the war ended, he went back to Jamaica, but he was to return to Britain 4 years later, a young man looking to build a new life.
And what did you do for nearly 2 weeks?
Gamble.
Tell me why you decided to take the place on the Empire Windrush.
Work. There was a lot of work to be done. In Jamaica, there was none. So if I could get back here, and I came back.
When you arrived, what was it like?
Cold. Still cold.
You came in search of work. How easy was it to find a job at the beginning?
I couldn't find a job for about 3 weeks. But I mean, I did get a job. And, you know, it was awkward at times, you know, everywhere you went. Sorry, son, there's nothing. I went to the Labour office and a man in there just said, "What job are you looking for, son?" I'm a motor mechanic, and he just said to me, "Can you strip an engine?" I said, "That's the least of my worries." See, this is the easiest part. The main thing is to get it back together. Then, you know, we have a problem. And we had a laugh over it, you know. And he said, "Come with me." And he took me to the other little factory.
Where did you find somewhere to live?
Oh, no, that was a problem. People who were new when I came, said, "Oh, sorry, you're not in the RAF anymore." And what will the neighbors think, you know?
Because you were black?
Yeah, oh yeah. But we did find a place.
Did you find that people treated you very differently when you'd been a serviceman to actually coming to England,
Yes.
looking to live and work here?
Yes, everybody say, you shouldn't come back. You shouldn't have come back. I settled down, then I did get a job, worked hard, found me a beautiful bird.
Obviously, a few years ago, what's now known as the Windrush scandal broke.
Yeah.
What did you feel as that unfolded?
Shouldn't have happened. But I mean, it's life, these things happen. It's history, it's part of history. Yeah, it's part of history. If they get the right compensation, and I mean, it's about the one thing that they can do.
As we approach Windrush's 75th anniversary, how do you think the Windrush generation should be remembered?
The people who did come and did work hard to help to rebuild. I have one of the most perfect lives, honest to goodness. I look back at my life from I was a little boy, and all I can see is happiness. All the way.
Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up.
Demographically, It is estimated that the black British population increased from 15,000 in 1951 to 172,000 in 1961 because of the Windrush era migration. The share of Britain's population nowadays which identifies as black sits at around 4%. With this in mind, Windrush Day was first celebrated in June 2018. It's not an official public holiday, but the government does provide funding for events across the country. It marks the day when the Empire Windrush itself docked at Tilbury and was created to honour the memory of those who made the journey to the UK and to celebrate the contribution of the Afro-Caribbean community today.
People from the Caribbean came in fundamentally large numbers. Over 500,000, 15% of our population migrated to this country, and with toil and tears and sweat, helped make the multicultural society and the modern economy that everyone celebrates today.
Oh. Hey, come on, baby. Hey.
For your right. Get up, stand up. So don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. So don't give up the fight. Preacher man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know, but life is really worth. It's not all that glitters is gold. Half the story has never been told. So now you see the light. Stand up for your right. Come on, y'all. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, y'all. Don't give up the fight. Yeah. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. So don't give up the fight. Well, most people think that great God will come from the sky.
I am overwhelmed with joy to see so many elders and their families here. I am so honored to have you allow us to collect your stories. And I remembered the messages of Mama Vanessa, Cyril, Mama Roma, Uncle Roy, Mr. Watts, all the elders, especially Betty Campbell, who sat with me and said, don't allow the stories to fall to the ground. We have everything we need to celebrate the contributions of our elders. And it depends on the young people to carry this work on. I'm aging. I'm now an old woman from Nigeria. And so I must introduce a greeting that my Nigerian elders have. When we shout Ndiba Ikwenu, it means let our people scream. It's a powerful cry of unity and support. And we say, yeah. Let me hear you. Ndiba Ikwenu.
Yeah. Mama said I want to embarrass her. Stay on the road and come right home. Mama said I want to embarrass her. Those guys like with the bucket and water. Mama said I want to embarrass her. She have a good eye on Mr. Walker. Mama said I want to embarrass Big Bone Shirley.
So what's the Windrush story about?
It's
the HMT Empire Windrush was a ship which travelled from the Caribbean to Britain in 1948, and in the June of that year, the ship arrived at the Tilbury near London, and there were 802 people on board from different countries in the Caribbean, and many people on board were tellers, mechanics, and captains, and yes.
So why did people travel to Britain?
Well, Britain needed more workers at that time to rebuild the country after the Second War, and the British government passed a new law allowing people from Caribbean to live and work in Britain and being settled. And the last one was the Britain used as an advertise to ask them to move into Britain. And between 1948 and 1971, over 500,000 people from the Caribbean settled in the UK, and Caribbean people who moved in the UK were known as Windrush generation.
What was life like for the Windrush generation?
Some people from the Windrush generation found it difficult to feel at home in Britain. For example, some may argue that the weather was too cold and wetter in Britain. Some people also miss their family and friends, and some people argue that they've been treated differently, unfairly and unkindly because of their skin color or race, and it's called racism.
Why did people travel to Britain?
The reason why people traveled to Britain was because Britain needed more workers to rebuild the country after World War II. The British government passed a new law allowing people from the Caribbean to live and work in Britain. Between 1948 and 1971, over 500,000 of people from the Caribbean settled in the UK. Caribbean people who moved to the UK were known as the Windrush generation.
What did the Windrush generation bring to Britain?
The brass, music, food, and 1966, Claudian Jones and Standard, the notive in Carnival, which is celebrated every August.
So where is the Caribbean?
The Caribbean is the group of the island in the Caribbean to see but North, South and America. It is about 9 hours by plane to travel from England to Caribbean.
So what is the Windrush story about?
The Windrush story is about a group of 802 people who travel by ship to the Britain from the Caribbean in 1948. They were mostly tailors, mechanic, and carpenter.
So what did the Windrush generation bring to Britain?
They brought music, food, and much more to the British culture. Example, in 1966, Claudia Jonas started the Notting Hill Carnival. This carnival brings hundreds of thousands of people every August.
What did the Windrush generation bring to Britain?
They brought music, food, and much more to British culture. For example, in 1966, Claudia Jones started the Notting Hill Carnival. This is a celebration of London for Caribbean music, dance, and costumes. Hundreds of thousands of people go to the carnival every August.
We're sick and tired of your ism, schism, games, dining, go to heaven in Jesus' name, Lord.
We know where we understand. My God is the living man.
You can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the